Welcome to Israel Update. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Friday. It's awesome to have you guys with us again. We're continuing to look at the prophets. And today I'm going to speak to you about my favorite of all of them, Elijah. And if God said to me, I often ask this question of, my friends, like, hey, if you could go back to one event or one time period in the Bible, which one would it be? If you could be there and participate in something or be there to observe it yourself, which would it be? My answer is always 1 Kings 17 from when Elijah arrives through to about 2 Kings 2 when he departs. That's what I would pick because he's my guy. I've always loved Elijah. And so we're going to jump right in and look at Elijah's call. In 1 Kings chapter 17 from verse 1, now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. And immediately, there's no introduction. Nobody even necessarily knows where Tishbe is. But Elijah makes this arrival, and we don't even have anything preceding this call to action that he gives out. It's just now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead arrives and says to Ahab. And so God's call to Elijah was immediate action. That's what he did. Immediately, he walked in on the scene. We have no record of him before this, but he just arrives and says, this is what the word of the Lord is. And he says it. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, and he even claims it. He says, there's not going to be dew or rain except at my word. And that's his call. It's immediate action. So Elijah arrives, and that's what he does. That's his immediate call. Now we're going to look. I'm going to flip these around, and we're going to look at his cost, and then we're going to look at his conflict. Then verse 2 of chapter 17, this is his cost. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, leave here. Turn eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Verse 7, sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Now, this might just seem like a couple of verses, but if we actually stop and dig into it for a second, firstly, Kerith means a cutting or a separation. So God is sending him to be set apart, cut off from everybody to the Kerith ravine. He's hiding there. And God says to him, this brook that's there, that's what's going to provide the water that you need. But the way that God fed him was through something that according to Levitical law was unclean. A raven was an unclean bird, which means that part of Elijah's cost was being prepared to enter into something that would have actually made him unclean according to Mosaic and Levitical law. But it was a methodology that God chose to feed him with. Now, we might look at that, and I've often looked at that and thought, God, what does this mean? He's living at this place. He's suffering the result of the word that he gave. Because in verse 7, sometimes later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. There had been no rain in the land because Elijah, speaking as the mouthpiece of God's voice, said, there will be no rain in the land. So he prophesies a drought, and then he has to suffer under the consequences or the results of that prophecy, and he too is struggling because there's a drought in the land. It's part of the cost that he paid in order to be the mouthpiece of God's voice. He had to become unclean ceremonially in order to eat and in order to be fed the way that God chose to feed him. Now, this is something that I've thought of because sometimes in life, I always try to look at the parallel of this, of what we can take from it today. Sometimes we're put into situations where it doesn't feel like, it feels completely unideal. It can feel dystopian instead of utopian. Sometimes the places that we're working or the co-workers we're dealing with, or even the way that we're going through and earning our living, for some people there's a lot of conflict in terms of big corporations. How are they making their money? Whatever it is, there's a lot of conflict that we face along the way. But sometimes God will use something that seems unclean or seems, I don't even know how to say it in today's terms, but the ravens for Elijah was something that were unclean. It was something that was not part of the mandated law. But God still used it to bring him sustenance. And I'm saying that whether you feel like your boss is maybe not somebody that's living exactly according to the standards of God, God can still use those sorts of situations to bring you the sustenance that you need. He can still use those situations to bring you provision. Now, of course, there's a line here. I'm not talking about running off and doing something illegal, not at all. But I'm saying we can look around sometimes, and I've heard a lot of people say, they struggle because they don't know what the company is doing with the finance, or they don't know what the company is doing in terms of this or that or the next thing. But for us, our responsibility as people of God, our job is to tithe. Whatever the church does with whatever it is that we tithe to, actually, the responsibility stops there. Our job is to give. What they choose to do with it is between them and God, and the judgment, for good or bad, will fall on them, not on us. That's something, I feel like I'm starting to get into dangerous territory here. It's the same thing with trying to avoid taxes. It's not really our job to see what the government's going to do with what the money that's given to them. That's on them. And of course, we have to be responsible. We have to be aware. I'm not saying that, there's obviously lines for us as conservatives. We don't want to be part of something that's funding abortion, etc. But I'm saying if you feel like, well, my taxes should go to fixing the road, and somebody else thinks, well, my taxes should go to building schools, there's a point where our job is to give what we're supposed to, and it's their job to do the right thing. I hope I'm making sense. And I parallel this because sometimes things don't feel... It doesn't feel easy. It doesn't feel like we're watching things that are happening in the right way. But our job is to keep our side of the street clean. Our job is to do what God has told us to do. And in Elijah's case, these unclean birds who would have made him ceremonially unclean according to Levitical law, that was the methodology and the tool that God chose to use in order to bring him provision and sustenance. I hope that encourages some of you. It encouraged me, because sometimes I've looked around and gone, man, I just don't know about this. I don't know if the situation is a good or a bad one. And I felt a little conflicted, but God's often brought me back to this to remind me that he's able to use strange ways and strange means in order to bring the provision that's needed. Again, please don't think for a second I'm saying, woohoo, let's go do something illegal. Not at all. I'm just saying God is able to use something that we might not think is a good thing, but he's able to use difficult situations, and he's able to bring us the provision that we need within the construct of that difficulty. I've rambled a little bit here, but I hope what I'm saying makes sense. And so this was part of Elijah's cost. He suffered under the drought that he prophesied about. And that's something that we as the Church of Christ have to be aware of today. Hard times are still here. Hard times, more of them are coming if you read through Matthew chapter 24, if you read through the book of Revelation. And yes, God is going to do what he's going to do with us, but we don't get to escape all of the consequences. We don't get to escape all of it. We're going to have to just lean in and dig in, and we're going to have to go through some valleys with people. And that's okay. There's always a cost involved to the call, always. It's more about, hey, God, what is it for me? What does that look like for me? For Elijah, his cost was constant. There were a whole lot of things that he had to pay. And I don't have time to get into that teaching channel. When that happens, I'll do that more in depth. But his call was immediate action. His cost, he suffered under the result. He suffered in the result of what it was that he prophesied. In this case, it was drought. He too ran out of water, just like everybody else. He had to be fed by an unclean bird, which might not seem like a big deal to you and me, but for a Jewish person, for somebody who was a prophet, for somebody who understood the law, it would have been a massive, massive, massive thing for them. And now his conflict. This is after Mount Carmel happened, after this incredible victory happens for God, where God answers by fire and consumes the sacrifices. And then Jezebel, this woman, utters these words, 28 words in the English language at least, about how she's going to come and take retribution against Elijah for what he's done to the prophets of Baal and Asherah. And then verse 3 of chapter 19, 1 Kings 19. This was Elijah's conflict. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. I love this level of kind of dramatic feeling. I relate to it very hard. But this was Elijah's conflict. He saw God's victory incredibly on Mount Carmel, and he knew that there was more coming. But in the in-between, in the middle, after words were spoken against him, his conflict was that he encountered fear. Now that might seem insane to us. You've just watched God answer by fire. You just saw something incredible happen that's almost unparalleled in scripture up until this point. Why were you afraid? Because that was part of Elijah's conflict. And obviously there were others, but this was one of the major ones. He was so conflicted and so fearful that he actually said to God, I'm done, I've had enough, can I please just die? And I love it. I love how intense he is. I love how dramatic he is. I love how much he feels. It makes me feel like, yes, some of us, the intense wombats in the room, are not alone, because this guy is my favorite guy. He felt this as well. He felt the intensity of this conflict. And for us, sometimes this is what happens. Just after an incredible mountaintop experience, we dip into a valley. And that's often what happens. But in that valley, or in the in-between, between mountaintop experiences, even if we're dealing with fear or hopelessness or anxiety or depression or just not being sure, being uncertain, whatever it is that conflict is that you are possibly experiencing, God has not abandoned you. He has not left you. There is nothing wrong with you because you're going through this type of conflict. It's just another element of the journey, of the marathon that we have to learn to navigate, and God is with us. When we continue reading verse 6, or the next bit of verse 5 says, all at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that journey, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Then he went into a cave and spent the night. So even in that place where Elijah was conflicted, where he was feeling fear and doubt and uncertainty and hopelessness, and really was actually probably suicidal, in that moment, God was with him. In that, the angel came and said, here, eat and drink, the journey's long. God didn't wallow with him, but he provided for him in that place. He provided for him in that place of conflict. He didn't berate him. He didn't say, you've done everything wrong. He just said, hey, you're tired, you need to eat, you need to drink, you need to sleep. Okay, cool, you need to eat, you need to drink, you need to sleep. And then I don't have time to get into it, but when we go through it, that's when God gives him the next portion of the mission that he has. That's when he ends up and goes and anoints Elisha, son of Shaphat, to follow him in his footsteps. But in this moment, in the conflict, God did not abandon Elijah. He was with him the whole time. And so my encouragement to you today, I say that every week, what can we glean from this? Whatever your conflict is, even if it feels like it's completely contrary to everything that you know you should be feeling, God has not abandoned you. He's not angry with you. He hasn't given up on you. He's there with you. He's there with me. And so we see Elijah's call, immediate action. We see his cost, suffering from the word that he spoke, given by God, and then his conflict, dealing with fear, uncertainty, hopelessness, depression, all these different things. Whatever it is that you're facing, sometimes those that are called to immediate action do suffer, and part of their conflict is what Elijah went through. But God has not abandoned you. He's not letting you go. He's with you in the midst of it all. And I pray that brings encouragement to your heart today and this week.
Shalom warriors, shalom Abraham friends and Israel partners, and welcome to Jerusalem. And today we are filming on a Wednesday. This is the Israeli National Memorial Day for the almost 20,000 Israelis that died in the wars of Israel and by terror attacks. But there is something very special in Israel that it's quite unique, that the Memorial Day is ending at 8 o'clock tonight. And this is the beginning and the start of the celebrations for the independence of Israel. This year, we're celebrating 73 years for Israel's independence, ever since May 1948, when the State of Israel was declared immediately into a war. The Arabs surrounding Israel and the Arabs that were living inside Israel started to wage a war already in 1947, as they heard that the British mandate is about to be terminated and the Brits were getting ready to leave this country. They already started with the attacks, and obviously immediately once Israel declared its independence, the Arab nations, the sovereign Arab nations surrounding us, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, waged war, attacked us in a simultaneous attack from four sides of Israel and also from within. And the people of Israel couldn't even have enough time to celebrate the independence. We went straight into a war, which, thank God, ended up with us having a state. 1% of the Israelis died in this war, 6,000 people amongst them, 1,500 Holocaust survivors. And that's why I'm talking today and filming today on the Memorial Day, because this is the Israeli main annual Memorial Week. Just last Wednesday, we commemorated the 6 million Jews that died in the Holocaust. And today, we remember the 6,000 Jews that died during the War of Independence, together with the rest of the Israelis that died in terror attacks and the other wars of Israel. But the amazing thing about this day is that as we are mourning and grieving and with the sadness of today, we just stood up 2 minutes at 11 o'clock today, remembering, and each and every one of us knows somebody that died in the wars. We also understand and realize that tonight, as the sun will set down, we will go into a time of celebration. The happiness, the joy, the incredible miracle that God performed in the lives of our generation to create and establish and form a Jewish state. After 2,000 years in the exile, 2,000 years in the diaspora, just like God promised us through the prophets of old, through Ezekiel, through Isaiah, through Jeremiah, through all the prophets of old, Amos, that we are going to come back home, establish a state that will be here forever. That's the encouragement that we're taking from the Word of God and from what we're seeing in front of our very eyes right now. A strong, sovereign state, a nation that can defend itself by itself, to be a house and a beacon of righteousness, truthfulness, and democracy here in the Middle East, and to be a home for every Jew around the world who wants to come back to the land of the forefathers, to the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land that God brought us back from Egypt into the land of Israel, and now from all over the world back into that amazing state of Israel 73 years ago. And it's here, and it's here forever. So please, tonight, you can celebrate with us, even though it's a Friday now, but you would remember yesterday, Thursday, the celebrations of the independence of Israel. The time has come that Israel is replanted, rerooted in the land forever. I love you a lot, Doobie, and I'll see you soon. Shabbat Shalom.